Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Captain Elena Marquez sat with her back straight, hands folded, eyes fixed on the map that stretched across the wall of the underground operations room. Lines, markers, red circles drawn by men who weren't the ones who would bleed for them. Her questions, about medevac delays, about supply routes for wounded, about the missing security drones, hung in the air like smoke, acknowledged by no one. She had been in this position before. Not in a war room, not always wearing the flag stitched into her uniform, but in every place where hierarchy valued silence over conscience. The same silence was there now, a suffocating quiet that told her this wasn't about oversight. This was about someone making choices that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with politics. Still, Elena pressed. If the evacuation corridor isn't secure, our wounded won't make it to base alive. I've seen the satellite images. There's no way convoys can get through those choke points without support. No one answered. Not Colonel Blackwell at the head of the table, not the contractors with their crisp suits and folded laptops, not the younger officers who avoided her eyes. They all pretended to be absorbed in the slideshows, their silence a weapon sharper than any blade. Her pulse ticked in her ears. The briefing was supposed to be about an upcoming extraction mission, but every word from Blackwell reeked of something else. Efficiency, cost-effectiveness, optimization of resources. It was the kind of language Elena had heard once in a different world, when hospitals she knew were bought out by corporations, when patients became units of throughput. She remembered that bitter lesson and she recognized its ghost here. Soldiers weren't soldiers anymore. They were assets. Wounded bodies weren't lives, they were liabilities. She should have stayed silent. She knew better, but silence had never been her way. "Sir," she said, her voice even respectful but unwilling to bend, "we don't optimize lives, we save them, or we lose them." For a moment the room stilled. Blackwell's jaw tightened. His smile was controlled, the kind of smile people wore when they were deciding whether to break you publicly or wait until later. "We'll take your concerns under advisement, Captain," he said at last, dismissing her with a glance. "Let's move on." Her stomach tightened. Advisement meant nothing. Advisement meant they would go ahead as planned and hope no one noticed the body bags. She forced herself to breathe evenly to keep her face unreadable. But inside, something shifted. A line was being drawn, whether anyone admitted it or not. The meeting ended. Officers stood, suits collected their briefcases, and the room emptied with the hum of practiced indifference. Elena remained seated, gathering her notes slowly, deliberately, refusing to show how her chest ached with unspoken anger. It wasn't until the last of them had left that a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "You're right, you know." She turned. Major Robert Davidson, doc to everyone who knew him, stood in the doorway. His frame was lean, weathered by years, silver hair cut regulation short. A former field surgeon who had patched together more lives than most generals had ever seen, Davidson was one of the few who spoke truth without fear. "They won't listen to me either," he said, stepping closer. "But I've learned something after 40 years of this game. The truth has a way of bleeding through, no matter how hard they try to bury it." Elena almost smiled, almost, at what cost? His eyes softened. Always the right question. The base at dusk was a different world. The heat of the day gave way to shadows, the desert stretching endless and silent beyond the walls. Elena walked the perimeter, her boots crunching gravel, her rifle slung across her back. Her shift was over, technically. She could have stayed in her quarters, written her report, pretended she hadn't seen what she saw in the briefing. But she needed air, space, a place to think. Inside her chest, the weight grew heavier. She thought of the last medevac she had commanded, 2 weeks earlier under fire, a soldier barely 19 bleeding out on the floor of her bird. She had pressed her hand into the wound, felt the sticky warmth, heard him whisper for his mother until his voice faded to silence. She carried his blood under her fingernails for days, no matter how much she scrubbed. Now they wanted to make the routes less safe, more efficient, they called it. Efficient. She kicked a stone, watching it scatter into the dirt. Her comms unit buzzed. She tapped it. Marquez. Static, then a young voice, strained but familiar. Captain, it's Private Taylor. Us sorry to bother you after hours. Her chest softened at the name. Jason Taylor, barely out of high school, sharp eyes and steady hands, but now recovering in the field hospital after shrapnel tore through his leg during a patrol. She had sat with him the first night, when the morphine wore off and the reality set in. He reminded her too much of the kids she used to read to in quieter days, when she thought she'd spend her life healing rather than fighting. "What's wrong, Jason?" she asked gently, already turning toward the hospital wing. There was a pause, the sound of him struggling to find words. I can't sleep, keep hearing the blast, and they say I might not walk the same again. I don't know how to deal with that." Elena slowed her pace. The ache in his voice cut deeper than any order she'd ignored today. "Stay where you are," she said softly. "I'll be there in 5. The field hospital smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, its white canvas walls humming with the faint vibration of generators. Rows of cots held men and women in varying states of injury. Bandaged limbs, pale faces, the quiet groans of bodies stitched back together. She found Jason sitting upright, staring at nothing, his hands clenched tight in his blanket. "Hey," she said, pulling up a stool. "Couldn't sleep, huh?" He gave a half-smile. "Guess I'm not as tough as I thought." "You're tougher than most I've met," she countered. "But even the toughest don't win against memory." His gaze flicked to her. "Does it get better?" She hesitated. How many times had she asked herself the same thing after her first mission, after her first casualty? After the night she still couldn't talk about, when an ambush had taken her entire squad except her. "Not better," she said finally, "but quieter, like waves hitting the shore, still there, just not as loud." Jason nodded slowly. "What if I can't walk right again? What if I'm not the same?" Elena swallowed. She thought of her grandmother's words, spoken long before Elena had ever worn a uniform. "You can't carry tomorrow's problems with today's strength." "You'll still be you," she said. "Different maybe, scarred sure, but not less, never less." The boy's eyes glistened. He looked away, embarrassed. "You don't have to be strong for me," Elena said quietly. "You just have to be here, alive, that's enough." Silence stretched between them. Not empty silence, healing silence. The kind where breathing slows, where the weight lifts just enough for sleep to come. Jason blinked hard. "Thanks, Captain, for not making it sound easy." She smiled faintly. "Easy as a lie, you deserve the truth." Later, when she left the hospital tent, the night air bit cool against her skin. Stars sprawled across the desert sky, endless and cold. She thought of Jason's words, "What if I'm not the same?" She thought of the colonel's words, "Efficiency, optimization." And she thought of her own, "We don't optimize lives, we save them, or we lose them." In less than 12 hours, she knew, another mission would launch. Another convoy would run the route she had warned them about, and men like Jason would pay the price. But there was something she hadn't told anyone. Not Doc, not the others, not even herself until tonight. She had a plan. Not yet fully formed, not yet safe. But in the silence of the desert, she knew, if no one else would act, she would. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Why was she awake when the rest of the base slept? Elena sat on the edge of her bunk, boots still laced, uniform still creased, her rifle leaning against the wall. The air was thick with dust, humming with the low vibration of distant generators. Most nights she forced herself into a shallow rest, 2 or 3 hours at most, but tonight her mind refused to surrender. She couldn't stop seeing the maps, the red circles marking the convoy's route. Couldn't stop hearing the colonel's voice, detached and efficient. Couldn't stop thinking about Jason's pale face, his whispered question, What if I'm not the same? She leaned forward, pressing her hands together until her knuckles whitened. This wasn't just another mission. It was a setup, an operation designed not for survival but for numbers. Every instinct screamed it. The cost would be measured in bodies, young ones, with more life ahead than they could ever imagine. She wanted to believe someone else would see it, that the system would correct itself. But she knew better. When profit and politics entered the bloodstream of command, conscience was the first casualty. The metal door creaked. A shadow filled the frame. Still up. Doc Davidson stepped inside, his face lit faintly by the hallway lamp. He looked older without the weight of the operating table under his hands, like age had finally caught him in the quiet moments. Couldn't sleep, Elena admitted. Neither could I. He closed the door, settling into the chair opposite her bunk. You've got that look. What look? The look of someone who's about to cross a line and knows it. She didn't answer. Her silence was enough. Doc leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Whatever you're thinking, don't do it alone. Elena's jaw tightened. If I don't do something, they'll keep running us into the ground. How many more Jasons before someone cares? Doc's eyes darkened. I've buried enough to know that answer, too many. For a long moment, the small room was heavy with words unspoken. The hum of the bass filled the silence, a reminder of how many lives slept unaware of what decisions were being made above their heads. Finally, Elena spoke. You've seen this before, haven't you? Doc's mouth twitched, a shadow of a bitter smile. Korea, different war, same game. We set up field stations with half the supplies we needed because some officer wanted to make a report look clean. We patched boys together with tape and prayer, and the numbers still looked good on paper. But the numbers never buried the dead. We did. He looked at her, his voice steady. So yes, I've seen it. And I've seen what happens to the ones who speak up. They don't just lose their careers. Sometimes they lose everything. Elena met his gaze without flinching. Maybe that's what it takes. At dawn, the base came alive again. Engines rumbled, boots struck gravel, orders barked across the yard. The convoy was assembling, trucks lined up in precise formation, armored vehicles waiting like restless beasts. Soldiers checked weapons, loaded supplies, adjusted straps with the muscle memory of those who had done it 1,000 times before. Elena stood at the edge of it all, her helmet under her arm. Officially, she wasn't assigned to the mission. She was supposed to remain on standby, overseeing medevac protocols. But she couldn't shake the feeling something would go wrong. Jason was there too, watching from a wheelchair at the hospital entrance. His leg was braced, his face pale but determined. He shouldn't have been outside, but stubbornness had carried him this far. When his eyes found hers, he raised a hand in quiet salute. Her chest tightened. She walked to him. You shouldn't be out here. Neither should you, he shot back. His voice was hoarse, but his smile was sharp. But here we are. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The young soldier who had nearly lost everything, and the officer who was about to risk more than she could name. You be safe, Jason said quietly, whatever you're planning. She froze. What makes you think? He cut her off. Because you look the way I did before patrol, like you've already decided you might not come back. Her throat tightened. Jason. Just don't lie to me, he said. If you're going to do something, do it, but don't pretend you're not. For a long moment, Elena said nothing. Then she leaned down, placing a hand on his shoulder. I'll do what I have to, but I promise I'm not leaving you behind. His eyes shimmered, but he nodded. The convoy rolled out under a rising sun, dust trailing behind like smoke from a funeral pyre. Elena watched until the last vehicle vanished into the horizon, her chest heavy with dread. She should have been on that road. She should have been in one of those trucks, ready to fight, ready to protect. But command had locked her out. So she waited. Hours passed. The base buzzed with routine, the endless grind of paperwork, radio chatter, patrol rotations. but Elena's skin prickled with unease. Every minute stretched taut, every sound amplified. Then the first transmission came through. Convoy under fire, ambush at the ridge line. Request immediate support. The radio cut with static. Another voice broke in, shouting coordinates, calling for air cover, pleading for medevac. Elena was already moving. She sprinted across the compound toward the hangar, heart pounding, legs burning. Inside, the medevac bird sat ready, rotors still. The crew scrambled at her approach, surprised by her presence. "You're not cleared for this sortie, Captain," one of them said. "Clearance doesn't matter when they're dying," Elena snapped, strapping into her harness. "Start the engines, now." The hesitation lasted only a breath. Then the crew moved, their training overriding doubt. The Black Hawk roared to life, blades slicing air, dust whipping into storms. Elena's headset crackled with frantic transmissions, wounded on the ground, pinned vehicles, requests stacking faster than anyone could answer. As the helicopter lifted, Elena gripped her rifle and looked out over the desert. Somewhere out there, men she knew were bleeding into the sand while bureaucrats calculated efficiency. Not today, not if she could help it. They found the convoy at the ridge, smoke rising from two burning trucks. Figures darted through the haze, insurgents firing from high ground, soldiers returning fire from behind battered vehicles. The air was a cacophony of gunfire, explosions, screams. "Multiple casualties," the pilot shouted. "We'll need 2 trips minimum." Elena was already on her feet, ready to drop. "Take us low." The bird descended, bullets clattering against its armor. Elena jumped before it touched down, boots sinking into dust, rifle raised. She moved fast, dragging wounded toward the loading bay, covering them with bursts of fire. One soldier clutched at her vest, blood pouring from a wound in his side. "Don't leave me," he gasped. "You're not being left," Elena growled, hauling him up. "You're going home." She shoved him into the arms of another medic, then turned back for more. In the smoke, she saw a young lieutenant pinned under a collapsed door, his leg twisted unnaturally. He screamed as enemy fire chewed the dirt inches from his head. Without thinking, Elena dropped beside him, using her rifle to shield as she shoved the debris free. Pain tore at her shoulder, but she didn't stop until he was free. "Go," she shouted, pushing him toward the bird. Another explosion rocked the ground, throwing her to her knees. Her ears rang, vision blurred. But through the chaos, she heard Jason's voice in her memory. "Don't lie to me. If you're going to do something, do it." So she did. She dragged, carried, shielded, until the last of them were loaded. Her uniform was soaked with blood, not all of it her own. Her muscles trembled, her lungs burned, but she didn't stop until the pilot screamed they were full. As the helicopter lifted, Elena held onto the edge of the bay, her eyes locked on the ridge line where smoke still rose. They had saved some, but not all. And as the desert stretched beneath them, she knew this wasn't over. The numbers would look good on paper. Survivors evacuated, mission technically complete. But she had seen the truth with her own eyes. The route was a death trap, and Blackwell had known it. She leaned back, blood streaking her gloves, her chest heaving. Some lines, she thought, couldn't be crossed without consequence. And this time, the consequence would not be silence. Why was the colonel waiting at the landing pad? The Black Hawk touched down hard, its skids groaning under the weight of blood, dust, and silence. Medics rushed forward, stretching battered bodies onto gurneys, shouting orders into the roar of engines. Elena climbed down last, her shoulders stiff with exhaustion, her gloves stained deep crimson. But Colonel Blackwell stood there with his hands clasped behind his back, flanked by 2 MPs. His expression was calm, almost serene, the kind of calm that came from someone who had already decided the verdict before hearing the case. "Captain Marquez," he said evenly, his voice carrying over the fatting rotor wash. "A word." The medics hesitated, sensing the charge in the air. Elena pulled her helmet free, letting the sweat roll down her face. "Sir, with respect, I have wounded to transfer." "That's already being handled." His gaze sharpened. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. She followed him across the gravel toward the operations building. Each step felt heavier, as if the weight of every choice pressed harder into her boots. She could still feel the hands of the wounded clutching at her, hear their voices begging not to be left behind. And yet here she was, summoned like a child to the principal's office. Inside, the air was cooler, recycled through machines that scrubbed the desert heat into something sterile. Blackwell stopped in the conference room, gesturing for her to sit. She remained standing. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said. "I followed my duty," Elena countered. "Your duty was to remain on standby. Instead, you commandeered a medevac bird, exposed the crew to unnecessary risk, and interfered with a combat operation outside your chain of command." Elena's fists tightened at her sides. "Unnecessary risk, sir, they were dying. Without that bird, half of them wouldn't have made it back. You know that." His smile was slight, rehearsed. "Collateral is part of war, Captain. You can't save everyone." The words hit her like a blow. Not because they were untrue, she knew better than most that not everyone could be saved, but because of the coldness with which he spoke them. As if lives were chess pieces, expendable, interchangeable. "You knew the route was compromised," she said quietly. "You sent them anyway." For the first time his expression flickered. "Barely. Be very careful with your words." Elena held his gaze. "Careful is what kills people. Truth is what saves them." The room went still. The two MPs shifted uneasily, their hands near their belts. Blackwell leaned forward. "You think you're righteous, Captain. You think because you drag a few bodies out of the fire you understand the bigger picture. But wars aren't won by emotion. They're won by order, discipline, and sacrifice. You don't get to pick which rules you follow. Not here." She didn't blink. "Then maybe the rules are wrong." His jaw tightened. He straightened, smoothing his uniform. "You'll report to HR command at 600 tomorrow. Until then, you are relieved of duty. Hand over your weapon." The MP stepped closer. Elena's hand hovered on her rifle strap for a heartbeat too long. Then she unclipped it, passing it over without a word. The colonel's smile returned, thinner this time. "Dismissed." The barracks were quiet when she returned. Soldiers slept in neat rows, their snores mingling with the hum of the air system. Elena sat on her bunk in silence, her empty hands trembling. For the first time in years she felt stripped, not of her weapon but of her place, her purpose. The fight still echoed inside her, the voices of the wounded, the fire, the smell of burning metal, and beneath it all the certainty that she had crossed into dangerous territory. Her comms unit buzzed. She almost ignored it. Then she saw the ID. "Captain," Jason's voice was weak but steady. Elena closed her eyes. "You should be resting." "Word spreads fast. They said you went out there, brought back the wounded." She hesitated. "I did what I had to." Silence stretched across the line. Then Jason's voice cracked. "One of them was my squad leader. They said he wouldn't have made it if you hadn't gone." Her throat tightened. She remembered the lieutenant's leg twisted under the wreckage. "He's alive," she whispered. Jason exhaled shakily. "Thank you." She almost told him about Blackwell, about the hearing tomorrow, about the walls already closing in. But she stopped herself. He didn't need her fear. He needed hope. "You get some sleep, Jason," she said gently. "That's your mission now." The next morning, HR command was as far from the battlefield as a place could be. White walls, clean carpets, computers humming quietly. It reminded Elena of corporate boardrooms she had once walked past, never entered. Melissa Patel, the HR officer, sat across the desk, her hands folded neatly. Her eyes were sympathetic, but her words were not. "You've been reported for insubordination, Captain. The colonel has documented a pattern of disobedience and disruptive conduct. This isn't your first incident. Elena kept her voice even. My record speaks for itself. It does, Melissa admitted. Commendations, mission saves, loyalty from your soldiers, but it also speaks of repeated conflict with superiors. You question orders. You resist protocols. That's not how this organization functions. Elena leaned forward. Then maybe the organization should ask why I question, why I resist. Maybe the problem isn't me, it's the orders. For a moment, Melissa's mask slipped. Something flickered in her eyes, doubt, maybe even agreement. But it was gone as quickly as it came. My job is to enforce policy, not debate it. I'm afraid your status is now under review. You'll remain suspended until a decision is made. Suspended, one word and everything she was unraveled. She left the office numb, walking aimlessly through the base. Every glance she received was weighted, some with sympathy, some with caution, others with avoidance. She was marked now, branded as trouble. At the hospital wing, she found Doc waiting outside the tent. His arms were crossed, his face carved with frustration. "They've made their move," he said. "They're going after me," Elena replied. "They'll go after anyone who threatens their machine. Don't make the mistake of thinking this is just about you." Her voice dropped. "So what do we do?" Doc studied her, his eyes narrowing. "We document, we gather, we build a case, and when the time comes, we make sure they can't bury it." Elena swallowed hard. "They'll destroy me." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe, but sometimes being destroyed is the price of being right." That night, Jason was waiting for her. He had dragged his chair closer to the entrance of the hospital, the desert air brushing against his pale face. "You look worse than I do," he said softly. Elena tried to smile, but it came out broken. "Rough day." "They're punishing you, aren't they?" She didn't answer. Jason's voice hardened. "Because you saved lives. That's what this is about, isn't it? You cared too much." Elena sank onto the step beside him, staring into the dark. "I cared in the wrong direction." "No," Jason said firmly. "You cared in the only direction that matters." For a long moment, neither spoke. The desert wind carried the scent of sand and smoke. The bass hummed behind them, oblivious. Finally, Jason whispered, "Do you think things happen for a reason?" Elena closed her eyes. She thought of the boy she had lost on her bird, whispering for his mother. She thought of the convoy burning on the ridge. She thought of the colonel's cold eyes. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe the reason isn't what happens to us. Maybe it's what we do with it." Jason's breath caught. "Then do something, don't let them win." His words cut deep, not as an order but as a plea, from a boy who had already lost enough. And in that moment, Elena knew the fight wasn't about her anymore. It was about all of them. Later, in the quiet of her quarters, she stared at her St. Christopher medallion, the chain cold against her skin. She thought of her grandmother's voice, "Let me be enough." She wasn't sure she was, but she knew she had to try. Because silence, she realized, wasn't neutrality, it was surrender. And surrender was one thing she could never give. Why was the folder already waiting on her bunk? Elena froze in the doorway. The barracks were empty, dim light spilling from a single overhead bulb. On her blanket lay a manila folder, thick with papers, its edges frayed as though it had passed through too many hands. No note, no signature, just silence humming louder than any alarm. She closed the door slowly, every instinct sharpened. She sat on the edge of her bed and pulled the folder closer. Inside, copies of mission reports, satellite images, logistics memos, all stamped with the same authorizing signature, Colonel Blackwell. Her pulse quickened. Half the routes marked were ones she had raised concerns about, all flagged as green. No notation of risks. And the numbers, loss projections, calculated against supply costs, were there in black and white. Lives were being weighed against budget lines. A sound at the door made her look up. Doc Davidson stepped inside, his expression grim. "So you found it?" "You?" Elena asked. "I didn't put it there," Doc said quietly, "but I knew it was coming." He shut the door behind him. "There are others here who have seen what's happening. Not many, but enough. Someone wanted you to have that." Elena's throat tightened. This is proof." Doc shook his head. "No, it's evidence. Proof only comes when someone's willing to stand behind it. Otherwise, it's just paper." She stared at the folder, the weight of it pressing into her hands. It wasn't just words on pages. It was betrayal made tangible. "What happens if we bring this forward?" she asked. Doc's eyes darkened. "Best case, they bury it and you lose your career. Worst case, they bury you." The next day, Elena walked the base like a ghost. Every salute felt heavier, every nod a question. Who knew? Who was watching? Who had risked slipping that folder into her room? Jason noticed the change immediately. She visited him in the hospital tent, and before she even sat down, he whispered, "Something's wrong." She tried to brush it off, but his sharp eyes pinned her. "Elena," he said quietly, dropping the formality, "don't lie to me." The words echoed from their first night together. They cut through her defenses like glass. She sat heavily, lowering her voice. "There's corruption in command, Jason. Orders given not for strategy but for numbers. And now I have the files." He inhaled sharply. "That's dangerous." She nodded, "Yeah." His gaze didn't waver. "Then you can't keep it hidden. You have to do something." Her chest ached at the simplicity of his faith. "It's not that easy. If I go public, I destroy myself, and maybe everyone around me." Jason's voice trembled, but it carried steel. "If you stay silent, you destroy us anyway. You said it yourself, we don't optimize lives, we save them, or we lose them." His words landed heavy. She realized he was no longer asking for her comfort. He was holding her to her own truth. That night, Elena met Doc in the dim glow of the mess hall, long after most had gone to sleep. He poured 2 cups of bitter coffee, sliding one toward her. "We can't trust official channels," he said. "Not here, not with Blackwell pulling strings." "Then what?" Elena asked. "There's a reporter," Doc said carefully, "embedded with one of the supply units. Independent, not on the defense payroll. If we get this folder into her hands, maybe, just maybe, the truth makes it out." Elena's mind raced. Leaking classified documents, passing intel to a civilian. If they were caught, it wouldn't just be careers. It would be court-martial, prison, maybe worse. But in her gut she knew it was the only way. "Where?" she asked. "Forward checkpoint Bravo, 2 nights from now." Her pulse thudded. "I'll go." Doc shook his head. "You won't go alone." 2 nights later, the desert was a black ocean. The hum of the transport jeep was the only sound, headlights cut low. Elena sat in the passenger seat, the folder tucked inside her jacket, her heart pounding with every mile. Doc drove in silence, eyes fixed on the horizon. The checkpoint lay ahead, a skeleton of sandbags and barbed wire, manned by weary soldiers with rifles too heavy for their shoulders. The reporter waited near the edge, a notebook in her hand, a camera slung over her shoulder. Her hair was tied back, her face half hidden in shadow. She looked more civilian than soldier, out of place in the dust and steel. "You're late," she said softly. "Had to be careful," Doc replied. Elena pulled the folder free, her hands reluctant to release it. "This can't come back to me. Not yet. Too many lives at stake." The reporter took it gently, her eyes scanning the first pages. Her brows furrowed, lips tightening. "If this is real." "It's real," Elena said firmly. The reporter met her gaze. "Then you understand the risk. Once I publish this, there's no undoing it. They'll come for me, and they'll come harder for you." Elena's voice was steady, though her chest burned. "They're already coming." The handoff lasted less than 5 minutes. But in those minutes, Elena's life shifted on its axis. She had crossed the point of no return. On the drive back, silence filled the Jeep. Only when the base lights came into view did Doc speak. "You still have a choice," he said. "Pull back. Pretend you never saw those files. Let the reporter carry the weight." Elena shook her head. "No, she can publish it, but someone here has to stand for it. Otherwise, they'll bury it as rumor. I won't let that happen." Doc's sigh was heavy, resigned. "Then brace yourself, Captain, because the storm's coming." The storm arrived sooner than expected. By morning, the base buzzed with whispers. Security checkpoints doubled. Officers moved with sharp edges, eyes scanning every corridor. Blackwell's presence was constant, his shadow long. Elena tried to keep her composure, but every step carried the weight of inevitability. When she visited Jason, he looked up at her with wide eyes. "They know, don't they?" he whispered. She nodded. "Then promise me something," Jason said, his voice raw. "What?" "No matter what happens to you, don't let them make you small. Don't let them take the part of you that fights." Her throat closed. She knelt beside him, pressing her forehead to his. "I promise." That night the alarm shattered the base. Sirens wailed, boots thundered, radios crackled with panic. Elena leapt from her bunk, heart pounding, rifeless but alert. Intrusion at the perimeter, possible insider breach. She rushed outside. The desert was alive with floodlights, soldiers scrambling to defensive positions. Blackwell's voice barked over the loudspeaker, commanding order, demanding lockdown. And in the chaos, Elena realized this wasn't about intruders. This was about control. They were closing the net. She slipped back into the shadows, her pulse racing. Every instinct screamed that her time was running out. She had made her move. Now they would make theirs. And as the sirens wailed into the night, Elena whispered to herself the truth she couldn't escape. She wasn't fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for her soul. Why were the lights so bright in the room? Elena blinked hard, her eyes stinging under the glare of fluorescent bulbs. The chair beneath her was metal, bolted to the floor, its edges digging into her legs. The table between her and her interrogators gleamed with unnatural polish, as if it had been scrubbed of every truth that had ever touched it. Colonel Blackwell sat across from her, calm, cold. Beside him, a young intelligence officer typed notes into a laptop, fingers tapping in steady rhythm. 2 MPs guarded the door. Elena's wrists were free. Technically, she wasn't under arrest. Not yet, but she could feel the invisible shackles tightening. "Captain Marquez," Blackwell began, his tone almost gentle. "We'll make this simple. Last night, a packet of sensitive documents was intercepted outside our perimeter, highly classified. Operational plans, casualty projections, material far above your clearance level." Elena kept her gaze steady. "Intercepted." Blackwell's smile was thin. "We're thorough. We found enough to know there's a leak. Now the question is, are you the leak?" Her heart pounded, but her voice remained calm. "If you already know the answer, why bother asking?" His eyes narrowed. "Because I want to hear it from you." Elena leaned forward, her voice low, deliberate. "I've seen your numbers, Colonel. I know you're trading lives for efficiency reports, and I know you'll bury anyone who says otherwise." A sharp silence fell. The young officer froze mid-typing, glancing nervously at Blackwell. The colonel's jaw tightened, but his tone stayed smooth. "You're emotional, Captain. That's your flaw. You confuse sacrifice with sentiment. Do you think generals won wars by listening to every soldier who cried foul? No. They won by discipline, by understanding that some must die so most can live." Her chest burned. "Don't you dare dress it up as sacrifice. Sacrifice is when someone chooses to risk themselves for others. What you're doing isn't sacrifice, it's slaughter." The colonel's eyes turned to ice. "Careful." "Careful is what gets them killed," Elena shot back. The MPs shifted at the door, sensing the tension. For a moment, it seemed the colonel might strike her. Instead, he rose slowly, smoothing his uniform. Take her back to quarters, he ordered, under guard, until further notice. She is not to leave without authorization. The MP stepped forward. Elena stood, her spine unbending. They could confine her body, but her silence was gone. Hours blurred in her quarters. The guards outside paced like caged wolves. Elena sat on her bunk, replaying the interrogation. Every word she'd spoken had been deliberate, but she knew she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. A soft knock broke her thoughts, not at the door, at the window. She turned. Jason sat outside in his wheelchair, his face pale in the moonlight. Somehow he had slipped past the guards, silent and stubborn as ever. "Elena," he whispered, "open up." She pushed the window open, her voice urgent. "Jason, you can't be here. If they catch you—" "I don't care," he hissed. "I heard what they're saying. They're going to break you. You can't let them." Her throat tightened. "What choice do I have?" Jason's eyes blazed. "The choice to stand. You think I don't know what it feels like to be broken, to look down and see part of yourself gone forever, but I'm still here. And so are you. Don't let them turn you into silence." The words hit her harder than any interrogation. "Jason," she whispered. "Promise me," he said, his voice trembling. "Promise me you'll keep fighting." She pressed her hand against the glass, fingers trembling. "I promise." His hand lifted, mirroring hers. For a moment the world shrank to that fragile point of contact, her strength bleeding into his faith anchoring hers. Then he rolled back into the shadows, disappearing before the guards circled. The next morning, chaos swept the base. The reporter had published. News outlets buzzed, headlines flashing across hidden screens. Casualty reports manipulated, military contractor profits questioned. The base erupted with fury. Blackwell stormed through the halls, summoning officers, demanding loyalty oaths, vowing to find the source. Soldiers whispered in corners, suspicion turning inward. The atmosphere thickened with paranoia. Elena felt the shift instantly. Guards at her door tightened their grip on rifles. Eyes lingered longer. Whispers followed her name. Doc slipped in during a brief lapse, his face grim. "It's out. The truth is out. But now they're hunting the messenger and the source." Elena's heart raced. The reporter. "Alive last I checked, but compromised. They'll do everything to discredit her. And you're their scapegoat." Her stomach sank. "They'll court-martial me." Doc nodded. "Or worse. But listen to me, this is when you decide, do you stay caged, or do you fight them on their ground?" Elena stared at him. "Fight how?" He leaned closer. "By refusing their story, by refusing to let them define what you did. They'll call it betrayal. You have to show them it was duty." Her chest tightened. Duty. The word had always been her compass, but now the needle spun wildly. By evening, Blackwell summoned her again. Not to the interrogation room this time. To the mess hall, emptied of soldiers, turned into a stage. Officers lined the walls. The air was thick with judgment. "Captain Marquez," Blackwell announced, his voice carrying. "You stand accused of leaking classified documents, endangering operational security and undermining command authority. Do you deny it?" Elena stood alone in the center, the weight of every gaze pressing down. Her heart hammered, but her voice was steady. "I don't deny my actions. I deny your framing of them. I didn't undermine command. I upheld my oath to protect lives, not numbers. To save soldiers, not sacrifice them for efficiency." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some eyes darted away, ashamed. Others burned with anger. Blackwell's smile was cruel. "You speak as though you are a martyr, but you are nothing more than a liability, and liabilities are dealt with swiftly." Her voice cut through the murmurs. "If telling the truth makes me a liability, then maybe the system itself is broken." A hush fell. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. For the first time, doubt flickered across the faces of those watching. Blackwell's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, his voice dropping into venom. "You've made your choice, and so have I." He turned sharply, barking to the MPs. Confine her, solitary, effective immediately. The soldiers moved, grabbing her arms. Elena didn't resist, but as they dragged her toward the exit, she caught sight of Jason in the crowd, wheeled in by a nurse, pale but defiant. His eyes locked on hers. He mouthed the words without sound. Keep fighting. The doors slammed shut behind her. Solitary was a box. 4 walls, no windows, a metal bed bolted to the floor. Time dissolved in the silence. Hours, maybe days, she lost count. But her promise to Jason burned inside her, a single ember refusing to die. In the dark, she repeated it to herself like a prayer. I will not be small. I will not be silent. And when the door finally opened, flooding the room with light, she knew the storm had only just begun. Why did silence feel heavier than noise? Elena lay on the narrow cot, staring at the ceiling, counting cracks in the paint that weren't there. Solitary had stripped her world into fragments: metal walls, recycled air, the scrape of boots outside the door every few hours. No voices, no windows, just time stretched thin until it broke her sense of self. The first day she kept her back straight, her mind sharp. By the second, her hands trembled when she reached for water. By the third, she stopped trying to measure time at all. But the words wouldn't leave her. Jason's voice, Doc's warnings, her grandmother's prayers. They circled her head like restless ghosts. Don't let them make you small. Don't surrender. Don't let silence turn into surrender. She closed her eyes and whispered into the dark, I will not break. Her throat caught dry. I will not break. The words became rhythm, heartbeat, anchor. Until the door opened. Colonel Blackwell stepped inside, his shadow filling the cell. No MPs, no witnesses. Just him, his uniform pressed sharp, his boots gleaming like glass. Captain, he said softly, almost kindly, how are you holding up? Her jaw clenched. She sat on the edge of the cot, refusing to look at him. I can make this stop, he continued. All of it, the confinement, the investigation, the whispers. One word from me and you're back in the field, respected, saluted. Finally she turned her eyes on him. What's the price? He smiled faintly. Loyalty. Elena laughed bitterly. You don't want loyalty, you want silence. Silence is loyalty in its purest form, he countered. What is war if not obedience to a chain of command? She leaned forward, her voice low. War is sacrifice, real sacrifice, not the kind you calculate on paper. For the first time his smile faltered. He studied her with a cold, appraising gaze. You think you're strong, but I've broken stronger. You'll learn, Captain. Everyone learns. He left without another word. The door shut, darkness again. Her chest rose and fell in heavy waves. She pressed her fists into her thighs until her nails dug deep. She would not break. Outside, the base was unraveling. Jason watched from the hospital tent as rumors spread like fire. Soldiers whispered that Captain Marquez had betrayed them. Others swore she was the only one who had ever told the truth. Divide cracked through the ranks, sharp as shrapnel. Jason clenched the arms of his wheelchair, frustration burning hotter than pain. He couldn't walk. He couldn't fight. But he couldn't sit still while the only person who had believed in him was rotting in a cell. So he rolled himself down the hall, ignoring nurses' protests, straight to Doc Davidson. She's breaking, Jason said, his voice fierce. I know it, and if she breaks, then it's over for all of us. Doc's eyes, weary and lined, flicked up. You're not wrong. Then do something, Jason snapped. Doc leaned back, rubbing his temples. You think I don't want to? They've got her locked tight. Surveillance, guards, Blackwell breathing down her neck. One wrong move and I disappear too. Jason wheeled closer, his voice trembling with urgency. Then don't do it alone. Use me. Doc blinked. You can't even walk. Jason slammed his fist on the armrest. Exactly. I'm invisible to them, just another broken kid in a chair. They don't see me coming. Let me help. For a moment, Doc said nothing. Then a slow, reluctant smile crept across his tired face. Maybe you're right. That night, Doc slipped into the records office, Jason close behind. The guards barely glanced at them, the old surgeon and the wounded boy. Who would suspect? Doc moved with quiet efficiency, pulling files, scanning reports. Jason kept watch, his hands trembling on the wheels of his chair. Every creak of the floorboards sent fear racing through him. Finally, Doc found it. A sealed packet stamped with Blackwell's insignia. He cracked it open, revealing casualty forecasts, projections stretching months ahead. Battles not yet fought but already priced in lives lost. Jason's stomach turned. They're planning to sacrifice them. Doc's face hardened. Not planning, expecting. They've built it into the system. He stuffed the papers into his bag. This is what we'll use to get her out. They can't lock her away if the whole base knows what she's protecting them from. But as they turned, a voice cut through the dark. Going somewhere, Major. Blackwell stood in the doorway, 2 MPs at his side. Elena was dozing lightly on her cot when the door slammed open. The guards shoved Doc inside, his face bruised, blood on his lip. Jason followed, wheeled in roughly, his eyes blazing despite the fear. Elena bolted upright. What the hell? Blackwell entered last, calm as ever. He gestured at the bag of documents the MPs carried. Your allies, he said softly, aren't as clever as they thought. Elena's chest tightened. She moved to Doc, helping him sit on the cot. What did you do? Doc coughed, wiping blood from his chin. Tried to get proof, didn't get far enough. Blackwell's eyes bored into Elena. This is what loyalty earns you. Pain, failure, shame. All because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. Jason's voice broke through, sharp as steel. You're the shame, not her. The colonel turned, almost amused. And you are what? A crippled boy playing soldier. Sit down and stay quiet. Jason's face flushed with fury. You don't get it, do you? She saved me, not just my body, my soul, and you'll never take that from her. Elena's heart twisted. The boy she had promised to protect was now standing, no, fighting for her. Blackwell's smile thinned. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You'll learn, Captain, they all learn. Silence is survival. Resistance is death. Elena rose to her feet, eyes locked on his. Her voice shook, but it carried. Then I'd rather die than live as your silence. The words cracked the air. For a heartbeat, the colonel faltered. Then he turned sharply, motioning to the guards. Leave them. Let her sit with the weight of her failure. The door slammed shut. The silence after was suffocating. Doc winced, holding his ribs. Jason's breath came fast, angry. Elena sat down slowly, her heart hammering. She looked at both of them, the old surgeon who refused to stop fighting, the boy who had found his voice in the ashes. And in that moment, she knew she wasn't broken. Blackwell thought silence was strength, but he was wrong. Silence was surrender. And she hadn't surrendered. Not yet. Not ever. Why were the soldiers whispering her name? Elena heard it first in fragments, through the thin walls of her confinement cell, carried by footsteps in the hall, murmured by guards who thought she couldn't hear. Marquez, the captain, the one who saved them. At first, she thought it was her mind playing tricks. Solitary had blurred the edges of reality, but the whispers grew louder, bolder, until she could no longer mistake them for hallucinations. She pressed her ear against the cold steel wall and listened. They say she risked everything. Brought back the convoy herself. Blackwell's trying to bury her because she knows too much. The words spread like sparks in dry brush, and though she couldn't see it, she could feel it. Something was shifting outside these walls. Jason was the one fanning the flames. Wheelchair or not, confinement or not, he refused to stay silent. From his hospital bed, he spoke to anyone who would listen. Nurses, fellow soldiers, visitors cycling through the ward. She didn't abandon us, he told them. She went out there when no one else would. I wouldn't be here without her. You wouldn't either." His voice carried weight not because of rank but because of scars. Men who had lost limbs, women who carried shrapnel deep under their skin, they listened. They believed him, because he wasn't repeating orders. He was repeating truth. And the truth was contagious. By the end of the week, soldiers in the mess hall spoke openly of her courage. In the training yard, recruits whispered that they wanted to serve under her, not the colonel. Even the guards at her door shifted uneasily, their eyes softer than before. Blackwell noticed. The colonel summoned a meeting in the operations hall, his voice sharp, his presence harder than steel. "This insubordination ends now," he barked, packing the floor. "Rumors are poison. Loyalty is survival. If any of you are caught spreading lies about Captain Marquez, you'll face the full weight of military justice." The officers nodded stiffly, but the silence in the room was telling. Fear lingered, yes, but doubt had taken root. Blackwell slammed his fist on the podium. "She is not a savior, she is a traitor, and if you side with her, you share her fate." But even as he spoke, the words felt brittle. That night Doc slipped back into her cell. His face was pale, his ribs still bandaged from the MP's rough treatment. But his eyes burned with something Elena hadn't seen in weeks. "They're starting to see," he whispered. "The soldiers, the wounded, even some officers. Jason's been talking, and it's working." Elena's chest ached. "Jason." Doc nodded. "The kid's braver than either of us. He's telling your story and they're listening. You've become more dangerous in here than you ever were out there." She shook her head, disbelief warring with hope. "Blackwell will crush it." Doc leaned closer. "Maybe, but he can't stop everyone, not forever." She wanted to believe him, but she remembered the coldness in Blackwell's eyes, the way he turned truth into silence with nothing more than authority. "I'm locked in a box," she whispered. "What good am I?" Doc's voice softened. "Sometimes, being in the box proves who you really are. They don't rally because you're perfect. They rally because you refuse to break." The words lodged deep. 2 days later, Jason proved just how far he was willing to go. The morning was hot, the desert sun baking the yard. Soldiers gathered for a routine briefing, Blackwell standing tall on the platform, his voice cutting sharp commands into the air. Jason rolled into the crowd. His uniform hung loose, his face pale but his eyes blazed. "Sir," he shouted, his voice cracking but loud enough to carry. The colonel paused, irritation flashing. "This is not your place, Private." Jason didn't back down. "With respect, sir, this is exactly my place, because the orders you gave nearly killed me. And the only reason I'm here to say this is because Captain Marquez saved me when you wouldn't." A ripple went through the crowd. Soldiers shifted, whispers rising. Blackwell's jaw tightened. "Stand down, Private, or you'll regret it." But Jason rolled forward, his voice rising with each word. "She carried me out of fire when no one else would move. She bled for us, and you locked her away for it. If that's what loyalty means under your command, then maybe loyalty is the problem." The crowd stirred louder now, murmurs of agreement, defiance hidden in lowered eyes. Blackwell's face turned to stone. "Guards, remove him." MPs rushed forward, grabbing Jason's chair. He struggled, shouting as they wheeled him away, his voice echoing through the yard. "Don't let them bury her. She's the reason any of us are alive." The soldiers didn't move. They didn't shout. But the silence that followed was no longer obedience. It was resistance. That evening Blackwell stormed into Elena's cell, his composure cracked. "Do you see what you've done?" he hissed. "You've infected them with weakness, with doubt." Elena met his fury with calm. "No, with truth." His face twisted. "You think this is over. You think whispers will save you. I will erase you, Captain. I'll erase your name, your record, your memory. When I'm done, you'll be nothing more than a ghost no one dares mention." Her voice was soft, steady. Ghosts don't disappear, Colonel, they haunt. For the first time his eyes flickered, not with rage but with unease. That night in the barracks, soldiers lay awake. Some stared at ceilings, others clutched letters from home. Jason's words echoed in their ears. Marquez's defiance lived in their silence. One by one, they realized something dangerous. Fear didn't keep them alive. Fear kept them small. And small was what the colonel wanted. By dawn, the first cracks had turned to fractures, quiet refusals, delays in orders, a sergeant refusing to punish a recruit for whispering her name. Blackwell could feel it slipping, and Elena could feel it building. From inside her cell, she whispered to herself, "This isn't the end, it's the beginning." But beginnings are dangerous. The following morning, the alarm sounded, not for training, not for a drill. Perimeter breach. Gunfire echoed faintly from the distance. The base scrambled, soldiers rushing to stations, vehicles roaring to life. Chaos surged. From her cell, Elena sat rigid, her fists clenched. She could hear the panic, the fear, the orders shouted through gritted teeth. She knew what was coming. In chaos, truth either thrived or was buried forever. The door to her cell opened. It was Blackwell, it wasn't MP's. It was Jason, pale and trembling, leaning hard on crutches he wasn't supposed to be using, sweat dripping down his face. "Elena," he gasped, "it's happening and they need you." Her heart jolted. She rose instantly, steadying him before he fell. "How the hell did you?" "Doesn't matter," he cut her off. His voice was raw, urgent. "If you don't lead them now, Blackwell will, and if he does, more of us die." Her pulse hammered. This was it, the choice, silence or action. She gripped Jason's shoulder, eyes locking onto his. "Then we lead." And for the first time since she had been caged, Elena stepped back into the light. Why did the air smell like smoke before dawn? Elena stepped into the open, the desert sky still dark, but the horizon alive with fire. Sirens wailed, boots thundered, the base a storm of motion. Soldiers scrambled to defensive positions, vehicles roared toward the perimeter, gunfire crackled in the distance. Beside her, Jason leaned on his crutches, pale with strain but unyielding. His jaw clenched with each step, pain etched into every movement, but his eyes burned with the same fire she felt in her chest. "They're breaking through the east line," he panted. "Commands in chaos. Blackwell's screaming orders, but no one's listening. They need you." Elena's pulse hammered. For weeks she had been caged, silenced, branded as a traitor. But now, the soldiers whispered her name. Jason had risked everything to free her, and the storm outside demanded a leader. She grabbed a rifle from a fallen rack, slung it over her shoulder, and pulled Jason closer. "Then we don't wait for permission." The east line was a furnace. Smoke poured from burning vehicles. Tracer rounds sliced the dawn. Soldiers ducked behind walls of sandbags as insurgents pressed harder from the ridges. Confusion rippled through the ranks. Orders overlapped, shouted commands collided. Some froze, unsure whether to obey Blackwell's voice on the loudspeaker or the instinct screaming inside them. Then Elena appeared. She moved into the line, rifle steady, her voice cutting through the chaos. "With me, hold the flank, eyes on the ridge, suppressing fire on my mark." Heads turned. Soldiers who had whispered her name now saw her in flesh and blood, standing in the fire without hesitation, and something inside them shifted. They followed. Her commands weren't barked, they were clear, sharp, human. Cover fire surged. Wounded were pulled back. Positions tightened. A defense that had been crumbling began to breathe again. Jason hobbled behind the line, shouting encouragement, pulling ammunition to the ones who needed it, his face pale but defiant. Every soldier who saw him knew what it meant. The boy who nearly died was still standing, because of her. And they stood too. Colonel Blackwell arrived minutes later, fury burning in his stride. "What the hell is she doing out here?" he roared, storming up the line. She's confined, she's suspended. But his words clashed with the sight in front of him. His soldiers rallying, their fire coordinated, their fear tempered by the presence of the very woman he tried to erase. He grabbed her arm, yanking her back. "You're finished, Captain. This isn't your fight." Elena ripped free, eyes blazing. "It's always been my fight." The soldiers around them froze, watching the standoff. Blackwell's voice dropped, venomous. "You disobey me again, and I'll see you court-martialed, rotting in a cell until you're nothing but a number." Elena's voice rose above the gunfire, above the smoke, above every lie. "Better a number for speaking truth than a name chained to silence." Her words struck deeper than bullets. The soldiers around her shifted, not toward Blackwell but toward her. Their rifles angled where she pointed. Their trust flowed where her voice led. For the first time, Blackwell looked small. The ridge lit up with another wave of fire. Insurgents pressed harder, mortars thundering, the ground shaking under the assault. Elena didn't hesitate. She vaulted the sandbag wall, shouting for covering fire, sprinting across open ground to drag a wounded soldier back to safety. Bullets chewed the dirt around her, smoke choking her lungs, but she didn't stop until she dropped him behind cover. Her body ached, her muscles screamed, but when she stood again, dozens of eyes followed her. Courage wasn't an order, it was an example. The line hardened. Hours blurred into fire and ash. The insurgents pressed, the soldiers held. And through it all, Elena moved like a blade, never the loudest, never the strongest, but steady, unbreakable. Jason shouted warnings from the rear, passing magazines, his crutches digging into the dirt as if anchoring him in place. Doc stitched wounds under fire, his hands sure even as explosions rattled the ground. Together, they became more than a unit. They became proof that dignity wasn't obedience. It was defiance when defiance was the only thing that kept humanity alive. By noon, the ridge fell silent. The insurgents broke, retreating into the desert. The base still stood. Smoke rose, bodies lay still, but the line had held. Not because of Blackwell, because of her. The aftermath was quiet, heavy. Soldiers slumped against walls, their faces gray with exhaustion. Medics moved through the wounded. The air reeked of blood and burned metal. Elena stood at the center, her rifle hanging loose at her side, her chest rising and falling in ragged rhythm. Around her, eyes lifted, not with fear, not with doubt, but with something far rarer: respect. Blackwell appeared again, dust covering his immaculate uniform, his face drawn tight. He opened his mouth to speak, but the silence of the soldiers cut him off. No one listened. For the first time, his words carried no weight. His authority had dissolved in the smoke of a battle he had never truly led. Elena turned her back to him and walked to Jason. The boy's face was pale, his body trembling, but his eyes shone with quiet pride. "You stood," she whispered, kneeling beside him. His lips quirked in a faint smile. "So did you." Later, as the sun dipped low and the desert glowed with fatting fire, Elena stood alone near the perimeter. The wind carried the scent of ash and silence. She thought of the ones they lost. She thought of the boy who had whispered for his mother in her bird. She thought of Jason, broken but unyielding. And she thought of Blackwell, still clinging to his titles, his numbers, his silence. He would try again to bury her. Maybe he'd succeed. Maybe the system would win. But she knew now it didn't matter. Because truth didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it bled. Sometimes it simply stood, scarred and unbroken, in the middle of fire. Her grandmother's voice echoed inside her, "Let me be enough." And for the first time, Elena believed she was. She looked to the horizon, the desert stretching endless, and let the words settle in her chest. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.